Good afternoon and welcome to the State Line Seventh-day Adventist Church. It's my privilege to welcome you to this very special event. Today we are going to listen to hear what God is doing in other parts of the world. You know, God is always at work. He's a God that works here in North America, but he also works in South America. He works over in Asia. And today we're going to hear about Papua New Guinea. And probably most of you have never been there. You've seen perhaps some pictures. And but it's one of the most diverse, I know it's one of the most mountainous places for missionary pilots, and I was a missionary pilot. It's some of the hardest flying in the world. And it also has some of the most diverse language groups. I think they have like 870 specific languages that they speak in that one country. And so today we are privileged to have Jack Sample. He just came back from a missionary trip over to Papua New Guinea. And we're going to hear about the amazing ways that God has led to this point. And obviously God has been working all along. And we are just, the samples are on this train that's headed towards PNG. And so we're so privileged to have them be able to share this afternoon how God is moving in this work. So before we begin, let's bow our heads for a word of prayer. Father in heaven, Jesus himself says, my Father is working and I am working also. We know that God is always working around us. And if we were just open our eyes, we could see where God is at work. Then we can be like Jesus and join him in his work. Father, there's mission work here. There's mission work in PNG. And so, Father, I just pray that today that Jack the Holy Spirit would come upon him, and Lord, that you would give him the words and the stories, and that this would be a time that would just warm our hearts. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you, Pastor. Appreciate that. Now, I'm going to guess that many of you who are watching the live stream or that are here missed out on the initial presentation that we made back in the latter part of October, where we were talking about what we're thinking we're going to do and what this exploratory trip that I'm going to share with you today was all about. So I'm taking it for granted that most of you have a general idea of what's going on with the Sample family regarding Papua New Guinea and our interest in going back there for basically the rest of our lives, to retire there and work with the church that's struggling in the village of Tipas and thereabouts. But just a super quick, in a nutshell, I want to recap a little bit about what we shared with you before, what I did know and what I didn't know before I went on this trip. I had heard that in the village of Tipas, where we had worked as Adventist Frontier missionaries back in the time period from 1994 to 1996, the end of 96, I had heard that a little struggling SDA church had gotten going, and I only knew two names, David and Bendo, and then I knew one other name that was a layman that came and helped them for a while, and his name was Elijah. And so I had no idea what I was going to find. I had no way to communicate with them that I was coming. I hadn't been there for 26 years. I knew that about 10 miles from Tipas, there was a village called Ama, where Adventists had started work there in 1960. I had no idea what condition the little church that was struggling there was in. I know that John Lello was killed there in Ama in 2012. He's an Adventist Frontier missionary. So all of these things, I was going on this exploratory trip looking for where God wanted us to settle in the area, the greater area there. And my goal was simply to show up, because I had no way to let them know I was coming, and see where God led us to. And just kind of, we were praying daily that God would show us what he wanted us to do, because he had laid this on our hearts, this burden. So I want to introduce to you at the beginning again, most of you, I've introduced this man many times. 3 years ago, I went and helped Adventist World Radio distribute projectors for evangelism outreach in Papua New Guinea. They sent 1,000 projectors, and they wanted me to make sure that they got distributed to all of the missions and not just kind of lumped in some one place or the other. And I called up a friend of mine named Peter Ollie. And you see him in this picture here. This is just simply documenting our 20, from 1994 till the present, 30-some year, how many years is that? 1994, 6 plus 20, about 28 years of friendship between Peter Ollie and I. And the one picture there where we obviously are the youngest, he was the president of the Sepik mission. The Sepik mission covers East and West Sepik provinces in the northwest corner of Papua New Guinea. And the challenge that they face is places like Tipas, where we were, are simply out of reach, budget-wise. The mission simply has no way to visit them or even know what they're doing. Communication, there's no connection whatsoever with the mission. When we were there, because we had to go out to town frequently, we got to be friends with the mission office, but they never visited us. It was just the other way around, because we were the ones that had the budget to go to town because we had to get supplies. So Peter Ollie worked for the church in 8 of the 10 missions in the country, in various positions, from president, secretary, and then on up to the union level where he was ministerial director. 44 years before he retired about 6 years ago. He's 3 years older than I. We're like two brothers from a different mother. We share so much. And I called him up to see if there was any interest, or I texted him first, if there would be any interest in him coming with me on this exploratory trip. And after he shared all the things going on in his life, which made me think by the time I read to the bottom of the email that there was no chance he was going to be able to go with me, at the very bottom he goes, in Pidgin, he said, "Mi bai hamamasla poromani mulon this round. I will be absolutely happy to go with you on this trip." So for him, it was a dream, because he was able to go places he couldn't go even when he was working in various official positions for the church, because their budget just is always short for going into these places. So the picture of Peter and I on the left is when we were together 3 years ago for AWR. That was at the airport in Alatau in the Milne Bay province, where they had just loaded us down with gifts. I got made fun of on Facebook for carrying a purse, but it's all right. That was for my wife, but they didn't know that, of course. So, all right, I am going to... I shared with you a little bit maps-wise where this is the last time, but I'm just going to give a quick rundown so that you can see where this is in relationship to the world. What most people don't realize, and for some reason this isn't going to back out any further. Well, isn't that interesting? Okay. Well, I'll just tell you then. What most people don't realize is that Papua New Guinea is about 2.5 miles from Australia. Now, there is a lot of coral sea in between, but Australia owns an island only 2.5 miles off the coast of New Guinea. So it's the actual territory of Australia goes right up to within 2.5 miles of Papua New Guinea. So if you want to know where PNG is, just look due north of Australia on your map. So basically, our trip consisted of flying to Vanimo, which is up here on the northwest corner of the country. This doesn't show the country border between it and Irian Jaya or Papua, Indonesia, but the border is just right over here. So this track here was a route that I had planned, thinking I was going to have to walk part of the way. Does anybody remember when I said I was going to walk part of the way in? Well, the good Lord knew that my friend Peter was not in walking condition for that kind of a trek, because we had our route changed when we got there, and we were able to go by vehicle to the Sepik River, and then this orange track here is actually the track going down the river from where the road came out. And so this track where I had originally planned, that was changed quite drastically. So we were thankful for that. And there was a couple other times that the Lord provided a vehicle, and one time where he didn't, where we got a chance to do a nice hike. So we're going to share all of that. I'm going to switch now to my photos so that we can get started on the journey. Okay, as I was arriving on the flight from Manila after way too many hours in an airplane, one was almost 15-hour flight to Manila, and then about a 6-hour flight on over to Port Moresby. This is looking down at PNG with the clouds just starting to get lit up early in the morning, and this is as we're coming down, almost ready to land in Port Moresby. And Peter met me at the airport, and we're getting, this actually is, we skipped taking pictures in Port Moresby. This is actually in Vanimo, because we went directly to Vanimo. We were going to go the same day, but our flight got canceled, so we spent the night at his daughter's place and then on to Vanimo the next day. So Vanimo has one of the newest terminals in the country. It's basically only been open for months. And so I had never seen it before. And it's a beautiful building. And we arrived at the church, the Vanimo Tower Church, and we were sharing the pastor's house. No pastors were there, but these 3 boys were sharing it with us as well. It's kind of a transit house for missionaries. And these 3 boys are street preachers. They walk all over the country, and I mean walk. I actually met them in the interior later. They were going through, somehow they managed to go through and find their way up to the highlands, and just, they go and they preach in the marketplace. They preach about the Sabbath and talk about undaunted courage. And they face quite a bit. At times they get beat up, and sometimes people listen, and sometimes they're able to give them literature, and they have a sponsor that that gives them a little bit of money so they can buy things at the market at times, but it's just incredible. It was humbling to me, you know. So the Vanimo Church, they gave us a little food after the church service. I had taken the divine service there. These are some of my friends from there, Matthew Gemmel and his wife at the end of the table, and then some of the other ladies. So this is the road now. We're headed out finally. We got a chance to ride in the back of a, well, we were in the front, but we were squeezed in the front of a Land Cruiser pickup. And Land Cruiser pickups don't have a seat all the way across, so I was only half on a seat. And 5 hours or 6 hours of bouncing along on a gravel road is interesting when you're in that situation. But this gives you just a little bit of an idea of what it's like. Is the sound coming through? Awesome. That little whining noise that you heard at the very beginning is actually an insect, a cicada type insect. We call it an insect sawmill. In Pidgin, that would be a binatong sawmill, because it sounds like a little sawmill going. So we had about 120 miles of this type of road to get to the river, and this is a highway. I mean, this is beautiful road. It's rock road, so I don't have to worry about great big mud holes. As you can see, we're So this is what was in the back. We were actually given a ride by a church member who manages the towers for the cell phone coverage. And they told me they're going to be putting like 9 more towers out there, so we will soon be able to communicate very nicely with our phones from the village where we're going to be living. That's a generator in the back. They were taking it out to place it at one of the towers that needed a new generator. So part of the road before we got to the sea peak, this part wasn't so well graveled. It's too far away from where the gravel is, and so they just used sand from the river, and it doesn't hold up quite as well. But that didn't cause any problems for a 4-wheel drive Land Cruiser. We managed to go through that just fine. And at last, I got to see the Sea Peak River after 26 years having not been able to get out to it. So I've been to the country several times and really wanted to get back to this river, but finally I had an opportunity. So I'm going to give you just a quick. You can see off in the distance a ship. It's a pretty good sized ship over there at that log point where the company is bringing logs out to the river to ship down. It's quite a large river in terms of water flow. It's one of the large rivers of the year. It's not on the same scale as the Amazon, but it's a pretty major river. They can. We're in this picture. We're at about 560 miles from the mouth of the river, and the elevation is about 120 or 130 feet, maybe 150. So that's a lot of miles for a little bit of elevation. It's just so beautiful. I was just drinking it in because I really miss that river. I probably did 15,000 miles of traveling on that river when we were AFM missionaries. That's just an estimate, but we figure we did the trip 15 times or something, or 30 times in the years that we were there. I don't remember now. I had it figured out at one time. It's a long time, way too much river travel. So here we have. We were there at where we met the river for about 2 or 3 hours until we finally found some guys that were willing to take us downriver. They wanted a pretty exorbitant price. They're from Tipas. We managed to talk them down a little bit, but it was quite an educational experience for me to find out how much more they pay for fuel out there at the river than they do in town. And so we headed downriver. It's almost dark. And as the sun started going down, I was in my element. I was home. It was just amazing. And Peter decided to take a rest. Actually, what he's probably doing is looking at the stars. The stars were amazing. You could just reach up and pluck them. It was a magical night. Still, we're like wondering, what is it? What are we going to meet when we get there? Well, I obviously don't have pictures of arriving at 9 o'clock at night, but I'll tell you the story. These 2 guys that were running the boat, they didn't know where we wanted to go either, and we didn't either. I haven't been to Tipas for 26 years, so how was I going to tell them where to take me to shore? All I had noticed is that on the map, the village had changed completely. They had all moved from the island, and they were lining this lake, Oxbow Lake, and it's like a 1.5 mile long village, and the only house that I was pretty sure I knew who lived in it was the one right next to where my house was. I knew that had to be Akan, but I had no idea whether Akan would welcome me. I didn't know. I had no idea. And so we decided not to say anything, and they just took the canoe to where they normally park it. And we started coming up the bank, and guess where we were? We were right at the Christian Brethren church pastor's house. At 9 o'clock at night. And he's a friend because he was one of the young boys that was one of the schoolboys when I was there. All of these, the list of guys that I know were all 16 to 21-year-olds in the first grade because it was the first year that the school was open. And Jokey is the one who was the CBC church pastor. Of course, I didn't know that, but I learned it real quick. And he said, I'd bring you into my house and you could stay with me, but I've got this program going, a 2-week Bible course, and everybody's just crammed everywhere, and there's no room anywhere at my house. So I'll send the boys, they'll take you over to Akon's house. I go, well, that's a name I know. I should be okay. So off we went down the trail, crossed a creek on a log in the night. Balance isn't the same when it's dark, but we managed. Peter almost fell on the other side as he slipped going up the bank on the other side, and then on over, followed a little pathway, and this is a picture of where we went, but it's obviously the next day because we got there at night. So this is Akon's house. Interesting thing about Akon's house is it's built out of all the wood and metal and everything that my house was made out of. Oh, sorry. That was a terrible thing to do. I should have muted that. Lesson learned. Okay, so over on the right where you see those drums, that's where our house was. And the concrete floor that's under those drums and under those short walls, which is actually a a crocodile pen from before, that's what he made my house into, the concrete. He made crocodile pens out of it. Because the ground had broken from the creek in the back and right up to the edge of the house. So that's why he took everything apart and redid the house. So I slept on the floor that I used to sleep on, where my bed was on the same floor that my bed was on when we lived there 26 years ago. I looked up and I saw the holes in the roof that I had put in there, because when he reused the roof, he didn't line it up the same. So all the holes that I could see in the roof were from me putting nails in it. The walls, the blinds that were made out of bamboo for making the walls in the house were the ones that were in our house. The rafters were our rafters, and the planks down below were where he had taken apart the bookcase. So I was really in my house. And this is inside. The wood on the floor is quite well termite ridden. But that's the Hilton in Tepas, where we stayed for 2.5 weeks. And that's a 4-man tent. We had lots of room in there. Peter and I used that as our mosquito protection, which didn't help a lot, because basically Peter got malaria while he was he must have picked it up when he was in Vanimo, because it takes 7 days for it to exhibit itself. He got it on the first Sabbath we were there. And he gave it to me because, you know, any mosquito that did manage to get in the tent managed to transfer it over to me, and I got it 7 days later. So both of us had an opportunity to have malaria while we were there. So when we arrived at Akon's house at 9 o'clock at night, he had gotten some indication from somebody that we were coming. And he told everybody that there's nobody else's house that they would come to but mine. They will come and stay with us. Now, I didn't know that. Guess who did? God knew. Akon hadn't been in the Adventist church since we left. He hadn't stepped foot inside any church. And there was a little bit of friction between those that were baptized members in the Adventist church and Akon, because they weren't too happy with him using the materials from what they considered was the mission house. And they didn't, there's quite a bit of story here that even they don't know yet, and some of it didn't occur to me when I was there. I could have easily resolved it. So there was interesting things going on here, and the Lord had it all in mind. He knew that I needed to stay with Akon, and he knew that I needed to bridge the problem between him and those who were in the church. Before I left, Akon had come forward as having an interest in being baptized. And he was in church both Sabbaths that I was there for the first time in 26 years. And that probably wouldn't have happened if we had showed up at David's place and spent the time there. But it took a little getting used to the idea for David's wife, because she felt that we weren't respecting David for his position as, you know, we're the Adventist missionary and we came and stayed with their enemy. That's the way she looked at it. And so I don't know what all went on, but most of this went on over a 20-year period. And it's amazing how long these things can be held in people's hearts. So there we are. And from this veranda, you can look down and see where our house was. In fact, those two white cabinets, or the white cabinet with a sink upside down on it. I don't know if you can see my mouse. Yeah, right there. That's our sink, our kitchen sink and laundry sink. And guess what? They're still great shape, and we're going to use those in our next house. So he saved them for us. Everything's in great shape. Nice double sink with stainless steel washboards coming on both sides. Hard to find and very expensive. So we were very delighted. I saw him sitting there. I said, "What you going to do with those?" He said, "I don't have any work for him." I said, "Well, I do." "Oh, help yourself." So this is Akon, and that's not a toy. Can you guess what that is? That's a crocodile head, and he was involved in killing that crocodile. It was one that would come up on these motor canoes and grab the canoe and crunch the back end of it, and everybody'd be in the water. This is one of the biggest ones you'll ever see up there. It's a saltwater croc. We had some fun playing with it, Peter and I, and decided to give an idea of what it would be like to have our head inside that mouth. So, all fun aside, this is David. This is Elder David. Everyone in Tepas speaks fondly of this man now, but at the time when I was there, they didn't take him very seriously. In fact, one of the boys said when we left, everybody went out from worshiping with us, and they said, once white skin was gone, we weren't about to listen to the black skin guy. He's just one of us. And so they gave him a tough time, and he ended up leaving the village. So, but he came back in 2007. So that's part of the story I'm going to be sharing here shortly. So obviously one of the first things we wanted to see when we got there in the daytime, the next day, was the church and where everything was. And so they started taking us on the journey to go see the church ground. This is when we got down there to where the church was, they had this decoration across the pathway that I had to come through, and you can see flower petals on my hat. They're throwing flowers on me. This is their welcome ceremony for when we come down to the church. And David and I are giving each other a welcome. And that's his wife, Christina, back there with a little pink bag, and she's been throwing flower petals on me, so she's thinking that's pretty funny. She's laughing at that. Her name is Christina. And this is the little church in Tepas. Isn't that beautiful? It's really a very nicely kept church on a big, beautiful section of land. And this was how many came for our first night. We did a little evening worship there with them every night while we were there. Here's an interesting statistic that I never would have dreamed. The school in Tepas now has 6 teachers. 3 of them are Seventh-day Adventists. And one of them is a local boy who was also one of these young people running around playing with my kids when we lived in Tepas, and he's now one of the teachers there at the school. And his wife, a lovely Seventh-day Adventist nurse, is also, and they're going to be there for a while. So I mean, you never know about teachers; they get moved around. But and this young man right here that I'm circling there, his name is Edite, and he married Akon's daughter, and they're both in the church. And he's a Seventh-day Adventist, and he's a teacher. He's from up in the Highlands. And then there's another fellow named Dion, and he and his wife are Adventists. So the church was greatly strengthened by having these school teachers that are Adventists that are living in the village now. So that was pretty exciting. And this is going to be where we camp out when we arrive in a few months. This is the missionary house that they're in the process of building. And they've got, the floor is done. They're going to take off those leaves. That's all temporary. They're going to put normal, what they consider normal siding on the side of it. And it'll be a nice little place. There'll be two bedrooms and one main room, and then a nice veranda. And it'll be waterproof, so we can put our things in there and while we're building our house. So it's just phenomenal. that this is already in progress. They said it'll be done before we get back. And this is the area around us, just gorgeous. And as we were working our way down, looking at the ground that they were showing us, this is the pathway along the lake there. Everything to the left of the track here is part of the mission land that they have decided is going to be given to the mission. Some of the fruits that are already growing on it. There's some bananas, some sweet potatoes growing there. And this is a group that was busily whacking away at the area where my house is going to be. We figured we'd start clearing the jungle and get an idea. I was hoping to get it cleared enough to take some pictures of it and show it to Alana and Corey, but they didn't get much further than what they did that first day. And so I didn't end up going back and taking pictures. But this is the edge, the other end of the ground. So the land that they have given to me to build our house is 175 feet or so in width and goes back as much as we need. So we can, it's very, very roomy. So now I'm going to tell you some stories. These two men are the key figures in the story of the history of the Tepas Seventh-day Adventist Church. And this is where things get really exciting. I gave you a little bit of information as far as David. David, as a young man, met me at the river bank in Pagui in 1994 or 5, somewhere in there. He was downriver a ways on the Sepik River where he was staying with an Adventist family and where he had been baptized as a Seventh-day Adventist. He had gone to a layman's training course and he wanted to go back to Tepas as a missionary. And now that he heard that we were there as Adventist Frontier Missions missionaries, he wanted to come up with us. So he rode back up the river with us and began his work there. He stayed after we left for nearly a year. And they were not very nice to him, the boys. And so he ended up going back down. He felt actually like he was losing his own spirituality, so he needed to go back downriver. And that was somewhere, actually he was there he had gone and then come back, because the reason why I sometimes hedge on this is because I heard these stories from 3 or 4 different people and I had to try to put them together. I've listened to them about 5 times since I got home just to try to process this because it's so complicated. The history, 26 years of history of this church is just incredible. And it's not even on the radar screen of the mission office in WEWAC. They don't even know it exists, basically. They've never had a communion service. They've never had the Sabbath school lesson, quarterlies, things like that we take for granted. They don't have any connection when there's some big event going on where they invite church members to come and be part of it. They don't know that that's happening because nobody sends them word. So they've been on their own. And the story that these guys tell, I recorded an audio of about an hour and a half of these 2 guys right here. This is Bendo between Peter and I, and this is David. These 2 guys told this story that at times brings tears to your eyes and at times brings joy to your heart, because it's these 2 guys that God has their heart, and they just, even though at times they got so discouraged that it's like the coal was too far away from the flame and they would get discouraged. But then God would renew it in their heart. And David, after he went back down to Chapanout, which is the name of the village where he was, I'm going to turn the story to Bendo. Bendo, he was being trained to be a pastor in the CBC church. And they had sent him to Bible school. They had sent him, various things. And he tells the story that he and Jokey must have had a little bit of competition going on, little challenge. They're both leadership people, and maybe had a little pride involved. Who knows? He didn't give me all the details. But Bendo is a singing leader. He loves to lead the singing. He knows how to play the guitar, and he's got a beautiful voice. And he tells the story that one day he was in the church and he was leading the music, and for some reason Jokey had some kind of argument with him, came and wanted to fight, whether it was physical or just verbal, I'm not sure. But it caused Bendo to be frustrated enough that he decided, you know what, there's plenty of churches. I'm going to go get a different one. He knew he had a friend that was a pastor of the South Seas Evangelical Church. So he went and he basically gave Jokey a hug and he said, there's plenty of churches. You can have this one. I'm going elsewhere. And so he wrote a letter to his friend, a pastor of the South Seas Evangelical Church, and said, you know, we'd like to start a church here in Tipas. And so he came and they looked at land and they decided where they were going to build their church. And I love this little section here. I want you to hear Bendo talking. I think I start this at about 4 minutes in. Let's try that. Oh, no.
But sometimes I done in my life.
I asked him to do this in English, so he's really struggling doing it in English.
I can worship a community.
Okay, are you able to bring up the volume up there in the booth, guys?
Little pieces of paper.
No?
This paper.
You're not able to bring up the volume up there?
Was
Seth?
lying in the room. On the
Todd? Are you able to give us more volume on this?
No one would see keep us.
This is all that I have from here. Are you able to
But
amplify it at all to the
done
speakers?
in my life, I am quite of this thing. I can worship, but I'm also.
Okay, say that again. It is HDMI, so you're thinking it's changed? Okay. we thought we had this worked out ahead of time so that we could do this, but apparently not. I'll just tell you the story. Is there something that I need? Well, the thing of it is, I want him to do the talking. What does it take?
Real quick. I need to find your audio devices here.
Go to the Apple. If you want settings, just go to the Apple over here.
Looking for your speaker, your sound.
Oh, that's right here. That's all I got. I hate eyes.
If you want to keep talking, I'll keep looking at this.
Yeah, but I don't want to tell this story. I want him to tell it. That's okay. Because I've already told it to him once. I want them to hear him tell it.
Why don't we have...
Let's not worry about it. I'll just tell him. But there's a couple of other places where I'm going to be using the soundtrack, so it would be good if we resolve it. Here we go.
Okay, we'll try that.
Okay. Thank you. We'll see if that does the trick. Go ahead.
Good morning. I'm Bendo Yopa, or you can call me as Benny. Benny Yopa. I would like to stress on what I found out. The main bait of 70 jets, that they fill their jets on it through the Mark 5.1. I thanks to our spirit of scripture and also the check symbol. Thank you for your mission. So I received my message, and then maybe 1 week later, it didn't delay that time. Then back and Sometimes when I in jets, my jets that I phone is Christian brother jets. I'm a Sunday keeper.
As a Christian brother and church member, I mean, to a
But
family that was church.
sometimes I done in my life, I am part of this thing.
He said, yet I was
I
still
can worship,
smoking,
and
and
also smoke secretly.
he feels the need to tell that because he's
When I
gonna, this
woke
paper
up
that he
and,
finds he thinks will make a good
in the
cigarette
middle
paper.
of a community, there was a thing happening. One little pieces of paper. This paper, yeah, I'm holding. Yeah. This paper was lying in the room, on the room.
The paper was lying in the road,
Like soil cover it already.
covered by
one
dirt.
would see that paper. But something is happening, like one little wind, round wind. It's not big and strong, but it's
So a round
little
wind is
and
like a
small.
whirlwind.
It just rise that paper, and the paper released from the soil, and the wind flew and flown the paper up, and it stuck on my leg here. It stuck, and I tried to remove the paper, and I swing my leg front and back, and I tried my best to remove it away, but paper did not fall. It can't. And I just put my leg again, and then I pick up the paper, and I said in my mind, I said, oh, this is newspaper, I will make a cigarette smoke. And then
He's thinking it'd
brought
make
it
great
into
for
my
rolling a cigarette.
house, and I put it on the sun, and it's not long. When the sun hit the sand, all the dirty or soil was just move or disappear. Then I came back. I think that when I delaying the time, if wind flow, it will took it away.
He was afraid
And
the
I
wind would
came
blow it
back,
away
and I
if he
pick up
didn't
the
pick it up
paper.
pretty soon
Straight,
after it dried.
I saw all those writing. I read, and I see that, oh, that's text on this pieces of paper. Yeah.
Texts, Bible texts.
And then I start to read. I read, and I turn the page again. Other side I read again. Then I brought the paper up to the house in my room. I got my Bible, big green Bible, and then I start to read with the Bible what I found in these pieces of paper that's true in the Bible. From one day that this paper changed my life, I found out that that's the story of Mr. Spaulding. How he found out the truth Sabbath, all the license text that the Church 7 Day feel their church on it. All those Bible texts also changed me.
He said those
What,
Bible texts
Mr.
changed
Spaulding
me.
said,
All the
now
Bible
I am
texts that the Seventh-day Adventist Church based
man
their
of
beliefs
follow
on
the
about the
truth
Sabbath,
7-day Sabbath.
he found
And
on this
also
piece of paper.
me. I said, I will follow the true 7-day Sabbath. So from day, I send a letter again, and I say that pastor for South Sea
He sent a
Evangelical
letter
Church
to this pastor from South Sea Evangelical Church.
not to come back, yeah.
Don't
Because
come back.
I find the truth already.
I found the truth already.
Then one day I came to this house, yeah. I came back, and
This house, who's that?
this house is for one volunteer missionary. His name is Jack Sembo, with his family, Elena, and one little boy, Raymond, and one little girl, Cory. So I knew them very well. So I came back to this house. I went inside, and then I just found out. And then I found one box, carton of this book.
A box
And
full
then
of the books.
Get it out. I start to distribute the books to each individual that I discuss with them. And then they spread the send message to other. When they discuss with them, then same time they give them that small booklet, Mark book,
Mark Bible.
Mark Bible. Then
So this is a close-up of the actual piece of paper. The one he had in his hand is the very one that was covered with dirt and beetle nut spit and everything on the path where that little tornado, Angel must have had fun just doing this with his finger or something, that brought that paper up out of the ground and stuck it on his leg. Just after he had taken the South Sea Evangelical Church back up to the road junction and left him there, and he was back walking through the village down the path, very close to Jokey's house where we ended up landing. So an amazing event. This happened in 2002, and it changed his life. And that box of books, he told me, he says, it's not you, it's not me, he said it's that book that's done all the work. Because everywhere that book went, it lit a fire. It's a phenomenal book on especially the Sabbath question, because that's the one that it was really about. If you've never read the Marked Bible, it's an old missionary book from back when I was a kid. And I found a copy of it and read it again, and I just really am amazed at how well it's written as far as presenting the arguments of the Sabbath truth. Well, that's just the beginning. From there, these guys began the process. By 2005, a number of the boys that all used to play volleyball with us there had read this book, and they had studied together and decided they wanted to build an Adventist church. So in 2005, they built a church and started writing letters to David, please come back. David didn't really take them very seriously because these are the same guys that didn't treat him very well after we left. And so he was like, yeah. So finally, before the year 2005 was up, they went down looking for him. And in the meantime, just a couple stories that Bendo told that just really tugged at my heartstrings. It shows you how far out this place is from any oversight with the church. May River is about, if you take a speedboat, we used to be able to get to the May River station where the other Adventist frontier missionaries were. We could get there in about 3 to 4 hours if we took our faster speedboat. Most of the canoes that they have motors on, it's a 4-hour plus travel. But he went down there by pool canoe, which means he paddled all the way down there, and he just needed some nails to build a church. And he figured, well, we're supposed to be under the May River Church. May River was supposed to be looking after the Teapot Church. So he goes down there and he shows up and he meets with the pastor, and the pastor didn't know him. And he said, where are you from? And Bendo goes, I'm from Teapot. Oh, we've heard of Teapot. And he says, but we don't think about Teapot anymore. And Bendo's like, you can't say that. He says, are you going to help us? We need some nails. So he says, well, you come in. It was a Wednesday night, so he came into the worship that night. And as Bendo was listening to him preach, Bendo remembers, even though it's been 20 years, he remembers what he preached about. The one thing that he preached was that there would be a lack of leadership in the church. And he says, boy, that's exactly what our problem is in the last days. You know, he was talking about so it's just interesting that Bendo would remember these details. That was one thing that really struck me. He's very, very intelligent, and his memory is phenomenal, all the dates and everything. So the next trip was to go down to get David. So they went down, and they basically drifted downriver. It's 200 and maybe 250 miles. So he's paddling and drifting down the river for about 250 miles, comes up to where David is, and convinced David that they were really serious, that they actually had gotten a church building built, but David couldn't figure out any way to go back up there at the time. And It was another 2 years before David made it up to Tepos. And from there, Bendo went out to the mission headquarters and met with the mission president. And there again, the mission president was like, so where is that exactly? and so they went into the office, and on the map, in the mission office, Tepos had an X through it in red ink. And you can imagine what that did to Bendo's heart. He said, "Take it again in the name of Jesus." That's what he said. That's the way he told the story. He told the president, don't have it crossed out. Put the tick mark on there again. We are there. We're alive. And he said, you've got to send us a leader, a missionary, a pastor. And the mission president says, well, I can't promise you anything. They just don't have the budget. They don't have the budget to even take a trip up there. It would deplete more than their travel budget for the year to go to Tepos a couple of times. They just don't, it's just that far away, for them. So that kind of took the wind out of the sails of Bendo, and he had to make his way back to the village. He got a ride up on the mountains between the coast and the river till he was directly above Tepos, and then walked back down to Tepos. And he got busy with some business, and he just kind of forgot about the church because there was just nobody to come and help. They all got discouraged, and so David showed up, and by the time he showed up, everything had just kind of faded away. But when David got there, he started bringing them back together, and they went up again, and it started this roller coaster over the years. By 2016, they had a group that went down to May River and were baptized, 20 of them. And then another year or two later, they had someone that came and did a program in Tepos, and they baptized almost 40 more. Wow. And then from there, 2018 until the present, it had kind of tapered off again, and there was a lot of backsliding. One of the biggest challenges is the men are very tempted to take a second wife, and that just kind of destroys their standing in the church. And then because of the companies, the logging companies, there's now alcohol in the village, which there wasn't before, and that's really messing things up. And so some of my good friends like John Yalpa, who I was really close to, is now very into the alcohol scene and working for the company. But we're praying that that's going to change. So coming up to the present, David and Bendo and several others in the village, in this church, were meeting together in prayer sessions, and they were holding hands and praying that God would send them someone. And they had marked out the land that I just showed you and gotten the landowners to give it to the mission. Now, it's not done officially because the mission doesn't even know they own this land, but it's given. Now they just have to get the paperwork done. But they had it set on 3 sections. They had where the church is, actually 4 sections. The church, the missionary house, the clinic, and they called it like a permanent residence or a pastor's house or whatever. And the interesting thing about it was the same land that I was looking at on the map before I went and praying to God about as a possibility for a mission, a clinic, and a house. My dream was the same as theirs. And I was praying that God would show us where we were to have the base of our operations. And they were praying that God would send them somebody. And when we showed up, we told them right away that we were looking at several different areas and just going to wait and see what God impressed upon our hearts as to where we were going to settle. And but when Peter and I were standing there listening to what they were showing us and listening to their story, and when they got to that part, and they never put any pressure on us, the church members themselves simply honored what we said, that we were going to let God show us. They didn't say anything about pressuring us that you've got to be here. Can't go over there, can't go over there, you know. Some of the other villagers were doing that, but they're not the church members. And I really respected them for that, the church members, for letting God, they wanted God to be the one that convinced us, not them. But after they shared the story and showed us the land, I looked over at Peter, and this look on his face and the tears in his eyes. And we just kind of looked at each other and kind of nodded. It was so obvious. I had no more question that this was not only the place, but the time. The timing was exactly God's timing. And so that was the first indication. And so we just basically told him right then and there, right after I looked at Peter, I mean, I knew exactly what he was thinking, and he knew what I was thinking. We're that close. And I just said, guys, you don't have to say any more. God has just shown us where we're going to be. This is too obviously set up by God. And so then from then on, whenever any of the other villagers would come, even guys that were basically almost at the pastor level of the Christian Brethren Church when we were there before and had fallen away and were now completely out of the church, any church, would come up and say, you have to stay here in Tepas. You can't go anywhere else. You're our missionary. I mean, they're not even Adventists. And I would say, guys, you don't have to say anything anymore, because in Pidgin you would say, talk, I die. That means no more discussion. It's decided. God has made the decision. He has shown us clearly that this is where we're going to be. So don't worry. We're still going to go over to Amma. We're still going to go up to Alcom, because we had heard that there was a church in Alcom. That was totally blew me away, because that's just a few miles up the Sepik River. I found out before we left Vanimo, because the leader of the Vanimo church is the cousin of Matthew Gemmel's wife. And she was telling me, make sure you look up Joel and find out what's going on there. Just a second. So that was a very strong indication that we saw God's hand. So from there, that was basically right at the very beginning. We got there on Sunday night, and Monday it was already decided that Tepas was going to be the base. And so the next thing we wanted to do was go up to Alquom, and so we made arrangements to go up on Thursday. We thought we'd go up on Wednesday, because Wednesday night would normally be like the prayer meeting. But they asked us to give them another day because they wanted to prepare a welcome for us. And in the meantime, this is something amazing that happened. Jokey, who's Jokey now? CBC pastor, right? Christian Brethren Church, that's what CBC stands for. Jokey had a son who had epileptic fits. And while we were there, within a day or so after we got there, he lived right on the edge of the water, of the bank, and his son apparently had a fit and fell off the house veranda down on the bank and slid down into the water, and nobody knew it. They didn't find him for a day or two. And so we had to deal with a very sad event in the village. And that little tent there is what they call the house cry, because they gather together and wail, and over there where the tarps are, that's where the grave is going to be, where they're going to bury him. But what I want to share here, that where God's hand was in this, we sent word that we wanted to come and visit the house cry, but because of who we were, I didn't want to just come unannounced, because it would be, they may have some agenda and so on, and it would be, we would pull the attention away, because you don't get visitors like us in a village like this in 20 years. So we sent word, and he said, come tomorrow, and come and visit me tomorrow. That's what Jokey said. So we came, and Jokey, when he sent for us, he said, or when we went to see him inside the house cry, he said, could you do a little talk and a prayer at the graveside? I was blown away. I mean, they had leaders of the CBC church there, and they wanted us to do that. In the past, there hasn't been, I mean, when we were there, the CBC church kind of put a stop to any involvement that we had with the church, because they told them because our teachings were so far off that we would lead them to hell, and so they wouldn't let me even pray in their church. They were afraid of us. The villagers didn't understand. It was really confusing to them, but it was their white missionaries that would come in and tell them that every year and warn them about us, about those Adventists. This is Jokey, the father of the boy that died. One of the customs they have is smearing mud on them when they're grieving. But I really like this picture because Peter is sharing the love of God and giving a beautiful Seventh-day Adventist funeral talk. And Jokey's looking at him with such attention. That's the pastor of the CBC church, listening from a man of wisdom, 44 years of church work. A very, very loving man who has the heart of Jesus, Peter Ollie. That's the casket. It had to be very large because he was already in rigor mortis and his body was spread out too much to fit inside something smaller. And that's at the graveside. Very sad time. That's the boy's mother that's hitting the top of the casket. So God gave us the opportunity to bring a little encouragement and to build a little bit of a bridge, that we believe that He has a plan for us to work with those people in the other church to bring them the special truths that are needed for the last days. You remember when I told you before that I felt that I would start with a different truth, the one on the state of the dead and hellfire first, and bring the Sabbath in later? Well, it turns out the Lord had a different plan, because it's the Sabbath truth that's going like wildfire through Namia land because of that book. And there are interests in the very headquarters of Namia at Edwaki. There's several other villages that have, even some have baptized members. And then Alquom is the church just upriver, and we're going to go visit Alquom next. So here's our travels up to Alquom on Thursday morning, and you can see they're all ready for a welcome up there at the top of the bank. And just before I made my way through the welcome screen there, I took this picture, and there's all the friendly faces waiting for us to come through and shake hands. And Joel is the one on the right, the tallest one, and he was a young student at one of the schoolboys in Tepas when we were there. He used to eat in our home, and he knew us well, and he worshiped in our church. And just like Bendo, he said, they just believed that I was a little confused as to what day was the seventh day, because they knew they were keeping the commandments. They knew they were keeping the Sabbath, and they knew that Sunday was the seventh day. And so it wasn't until this book, this little page got stuck on Bendo's leg, that they found out, and they're like, oh, white man, you know Gilman. The white missionary, he wasn't confused. He knew. And Joel was one of those boys that the book is what changed his life. But his story is a little different. You're going to find that out in just a second. I'm going to let him tell you. But unfortunately, I gave this camera to someone who didn't know how to hold it. So I just wanted you to see just a little bit here of what they did when we came up through the screen. Because, see, they're putting leis on us, and they're throwing the flowers again. I don't want you to get seasick, so I won't dally on this very long because, unfortunately, the guy I gave it to, this is after Peter and I are through now, and I'm taking pictures of them coming the rest of the way. But it's something they do anywhere in the country. I've seen this. It could be, you can be in the Highlands, you can be anywhere. They create a little bit of decoration, and they throw flowers on you and put leis around you, and they welcome us. It was a beautiful welcome. This is the picture I took. I was able to hold a little bit more still than the other guy. But you see Bendo and Nano, the guy with the Highlands cap, as I call it. He's the one that was baptized the last Sabbath we were there. He's been ready for baptism for years, but there's just been nobody show up in the village that can baptize. So when Peter was there, they took advantage of that. And that's John Yaupa. Okay, so now we're moving into their little place where they worship, which is actually the community school in Auquam. They don't have their own church yet. And this man is going to tell us a little bit of his story, but I'm going to have to translate because he's speaking in Pidgin. Some of it you'll pick up, but it's still very interesting to see. Okay, let's see if I can get it started. Okay, unfortunately on this one because so I said, you knew me a little bit, and he goes, oh, I knew you all together. So when he says low to nothing, he meant he was worshiping with us, but he really didn't know what. So they were basically following John Yaupa and coming to worship with us. But okay, this isn't going to work very well because of the difference between the two. So I'll just tell his story. So he had somebody give him the book, and his way of interpreting it. With Bendo, what got his attention was the various texts that proved that the Sabbath was right. But with Joel, when he got the book and read the book, he said, it came down to me, he said, in Matthew it says that there's a road that goes to hell that's really big and everybody goes that way, and there's a little road that goes to heaven and only a few find it. He said, well, there's thousands of churches that are all worshiping on Sunday, and there's only one that worships on Sabbath, so I'm going to go that way. And then he said, once I did that, then I found all the other truths that convinced me. So it was just, I love the simple logic, don't you? So their little church has 27 baptized. Then he said that backslidden down to about 6 or 7, but they have 30 or 40 currently attending because they have a lot of interests. And so a lot of those that have backslidden will come back. The same thing happened in Tipos. While we were there, they had a reconciliation service where a lot of the backslidden ones came in and confessed and asked to be reinstated as members. So, or at least stated their intent. It was beautiful. So we had a nice little rap session, and then we had a worship later on in the day. We spent the whole day up there. We went to see the land where they're going to build a church. This is the jungle trail going over to it, and here's the general area. Somebody's building a canoe there, but this is the area where they're going to build their church. They want to have a really nice sign that faces the river, so people going up and down the river will be able to know there's a Seventh-day Adventist church there. They're just so excited. And we had all kinds of fun talking about what kinds of things we were going to do. And then those of us that went up on this trip decided to just drift down the river and eat while we were on our way down. We were having such fun, and the camaraderie, and it was on this boat ride that I learned that You remember the story that I told, the children's story, where God took the handle of my motor and I went full speed down a river that it should have hit all kinds of trees in order to save the life of a lady who was pre-eclamptic and going to die that night along with her baby. I hadn't found anybody who knew anything about that until we were drifting down the river and John Yalpa brought it up. And I didn't even bring it up. And he told me that the baby didn't make it to adulthood, but the mother is still alive. But that's as much as I know. But I was hoping I would get some kind of information on this trip about them, and so God provided that for me. I was pretty excited about that. Okay, so that's in a nutshell the story of the Alquam Church and a little bit of the story of the Tipas Church. Now it's time to go visit Amma. Remember I told you Amma was going to be perhaps a good walk over a mountain pass and roughly maybe 10 miles or so. Well, it turns out, now in the meantime here, poor Peter has gotten malaria on Sabbath, and so he's just getting over that. And we're going into Amma on Wednesday, Sabbath, Sunday, Monday. So he had 3 days taking the medicine, and then he had a little bit of back problems that a lot of times when you're suffering from malaria, if you're not careful, something else will, because you're lacking oxygen to all of your muscles and joints because of when you get malaria, it attacks the red blood cells, so therefore you're not getting much oxygen. And so anyway, he wasn't in the greatest shape, but by Wednesday he was ready to travel. But these guys said, well, we're not going to let you guys walk. We know somebody over at the company place, and we'll go over there and arrange for a vehicle to take you guys. So they did that. We had the privilege of riding on a company vehicle up and over this beautiful road that takes us up over the mountain pass. Here we are. This is first gear stuff. So this is very steep, but still excellent road. This is highway for over there. Compared to what we used to go out to the Sea Peak on with the mud holes, there's not a mud hole on this road. Now I can see there could be problems with some washouts, with some of the major rainstorms, but you can see us climbing up out of the Sea Peak River plain there, and let's see that. I wanted to get this is just coming over this is just looking down over the plain. There we go. Okay, not quite to the top yet. There we are. Now we're looking down the other side. Now we're in Amma territory. All of that road you see down there is where we're going to be going. And on the way out, we walked this road. That was about almost 9 miles that we walked out. And that was almost too much for Peter. I kind of felt sorry for him. But we made it. He had the wrong shoes, that's for sure. So coming down, this is Gaspar and his wife, and this is Council Max of Amma. Gaspar is the one who's holding the church together in Amma. Remember I told you a guy by the name of Michael who had helped the translator, and then they gave him some tin to build an Adventist church, and they told him to preach in it. Do you remember that story at all? Well, Michael is no longer in the church. He's given up. The story of the Amma church is the sad one. It's the saddest one of the three because there's been no growth, it's been dying, and it's almost dead. But this man is trying to hold it together. This is the church right here, and he's heading over. He is the only one that takes care of it. He's the one that keeps the grass cut. He hits the Gottermoot, as they call it, the signal for whenever there's a worship service. He leads the worship services, but very seldom does he get anybody to come. What happened was, I told you a little bit of the history before, but in 1960, the Adventist missionaries started the work there. And as the Council Max tells us, they came in and broke the spears and bow and arrows and stopped the fighting and brought peace to our village in 1960. It was a New Guinea man that came. It wasn't a white missionary. And he spent 6 or so years with them. They built an airstrip. They got everything all set up, and things were going well. And then he left, and things kind of died down. And it was this same kind of a thing that happens when you don't have any kind of connection with any part of the church. And so, long story short, Gaspar and Bob are the two that are holding it together, and they're relatively new converts. When John Lello died in Amma, that's when the last wind went out of their sails. They haven't had anyone come since. Now you might ask, well, doesn't AFM have a missionary in the Amma? I mean, if you read their magazine, it says Amma Project, and Orion and Karen Lawrence are supposed to be missionaries. Orion has never made it to Amma. He's never been there. He tried to go once, but he didn't make it because the river was too low. I met with Orion on this trip, and we talked at length because as I sat in this little church, my head in my hands, praying, Lord, how can I help this church? Because to be honest with you, if I hadn't already seen that the Lord intended for us to put our base in Tipas, this is the one that would have pulled me the hardest. And for selfish reasons as well, because it's a much nicer place because there's mountain streams coming down that you can just drink right out of the stream, and it's just a completely different than being in the swamp on the big river. And God gave me the idea that I can build a smaller house over there and go back and forth. And when I talked to Orion about it, he'll be able to come up and spend time with them too, as long as there's a house there. But AFM won't let them build a house up there. So if I am able to build a house in Amma, we'll have 2 different missionaries, plus we're going to look for a volunteer missionary that can stay there and try to get the work back up in Amma. There's so much need there. And it just breaks your heart to hear their story. But we went through, we listened to him tell about his little church and how that's the actual medal that the SIL translator gave him after they had left in 1988. That's the little piece of wood that they hit. I'll show you how they do that. He's going to show you what he does every Sabbath. I don't know if you can hear this or not. I can't.
Sati walking, yawai kama, yunami, yunami, yunami. Oh, Sati walking, yunami, Papa no tanda. Over to jungle again, even though there's a beautiful rock road under there. I went for a little hike with Gaspar to go up to his mountain garden, which is the same elevation as the top of that pass we went over. And we did a nice little loop hike with him. David came with us, and he had a little, we call these house winds, where they just have a roof and you can sit and enjoy out from the rain or whatever, and out from the sun, yet the wind blows through. So we had a wonderful time. He visited some of the areas of his garden. This is a little lime tree that he's getting the limes off of up there. You can see them up in there. There he's got some in his hands. And we were just having a good time. I decided to do a little monkeying around. And you can see how far off the valley floor we are, because if you look down through the gap in the trees there, we're up about 600 feet off the valley floor. We had a good time. Nice hike. That's Michael. And after John Lello died, the men of his category and that were trying to hold the church together, it was like the last punch in the gut, and they just lost their courage. And there's a new denomination that's come in called the Revival Church. And it's pretty animated, and it's pulled a lot of these old soldiers because it's given them something to do in the Lord's work. And there's just nothing left in the Adventist church to hold them there, and they don't have any connection with the leadership of the church. So that's what we need to work on, is to get that connection. And there's one of the other old guys. He's the one that owns the ground. He said, you can have the land, build a mission. We want a mission. In fact, he said very emphatically, we want a white man here by the first of next year. I said, well, I can't promise you a white man, but I'd like to come build a house, and maybe we can find a permanent volunteer missionary from PNG. So next day, back to Tipas. And we had quite a hike. And Peter is so much fun to be with. I'm going to hurry through this a little bit more than I was going to because I'm looking at the time. And I know we got a late start, but still I don't want to go too late. And I want to get to the punchline as to how God led in all of this. So here we are walking back up over that pass that we went in the car. And then Peter was a little bit worn out. We gave him a little break there after he got to the top. In fact, he told me, he says the only reason he made it up was because David was telling him mission stories on the way up. He said, the fuel of those mission stories is what kept me going up that hill. Kept my mind off of he had the wrong shoes. He had some slip-on shoes that were just terrible for that kind of hiking. We took a shortcut going down, and that was a little bit challenging. My kind of hiking, so it was easy for me, but for Peter was not so much. So this little section here, just as we got back down to the road from the shortcut, I thought you'd enjoy this.
Shortcut finish now.
Shortcut finish now, long kata.
And finish.
Okay.
Time blow 840 now.
Time blow panuai.
Okay.
He's always got a good sense of humor. It's a food for them. I haven't really eaten it. To me, it's just a bunch of dry seeds, but they figure out a way to use it in their sago, and it's supposedly good for you. But it's really hard on the shoulders. I carried one down from his garden, and I ended up having to just hold it in my hand. I couldn't have it. I got too many bones sticking out here, and they're very sharp protrusions on those things, and they're heavy, so it wasn't much fun to carry. It's a little roadside orchid that they decided I should wear in my hat. As we're coming back to the village called Panawai on the opposite side of the river from Tipas, and this is where we had a boat waiting for us, and to head back. Most of you probably remember a picture of my wife holding a little baby that she saved his life. We told a little bit of the story about this is him on the left side of that motor with his eye squinted shut because when he was young he had somebody poke his eye. That's little Leslie, the little baby that they saved his life. He's Akon's son, and he's still living in Akon's house with his wife. Now here we are back at Tipas. The next Sabbath was the high Sabbath. This was the baptism Sabbath, and we had over 70 people in that little church. Isn't that exciting? And remember, I didn't even know there was more than 2 or 3, and look at this. What a blessing. Yeah, there's quite a few young ones there. So here's Pastor Ollie going through the baptismal vows with Nano. Nano calls himself Naps now. I don't know why. I still like Nano better, but down in the water he went. He was so excited to finally be baptized. And these 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and this is Akon here, came forward and stood up for getting ready for being baptized. I was really excited about that. This man over here on the right is 80 years old, and he is a deacon. He's another strong one in the church.
So we have a deacon and an elder. David is the elder, and Drake is the deacon. He's pretty fit for 80 years old, as you'll see in a picture or two down the way. This is the reconciliation meeting that we had. These people are up. Each one of them has said something that they were confessing before the church and asking for forgiveness so that they could be back into the fold. It was a beautiful service. Pastor Ollie had never seen anything like it. When they asked him if they could do one, he wasn't sure what they meant, so he talked at length with them. But these are all the happy faces after the reconciliation. They're mixed in with the new baptism and the elder, of course, David. So this man down here standing up in the canoe is none other than the 80-year-old deacon. How fit do you think he is standing in a little tiny log like that on the river? He's the only one who still lives on the island, and he paddles over every time there's any event at the church or when he's working, or just he's back and forth on that river all the time. Now, he was an old man. I always thought he was an old man when I was there before as a missionary, and I guess he's got about 14 years on me. There's another story. Max. This man has got something that's paralyzing him. That's the deacon, Drake, over on the left, on the other side of Max, on Max's right, on the left of the picture. Max wanted me to come see him, or I had told his boys that I would come see him. Max was somebody who worked with me back when I was doing the airstrip in 1996, 95, 96. So he was one that helped me do this 1 6-foot tree that we had to get off of the airstrip that had been lying on the ground for 20 years. We had a double-headed chainsaw bar that with an Alaska mill that could do 42-inch slabs, and we were cutting things up. So Max was kind of one of my right-hand guys in the area of chainsaw work. And I don't know what's wrong with him. He's never been to a doctor to find out, but he'll walk like this, and he can't talk. And when he saw me, he just bawled like a baby. And I prayed with him. And then right afterwards, the next day, I think it was trying to remember what day that was, like Tuesday. And he sent word that he wanted me to come see him again because he felt better after I prayed for him. So I got the word right after I got malaria. Now, I always get malaria at 11 o'clock. I don't know why, but 11 o'clock in the morning, every time I get malaria, I start feeling my skin feel weird at about 11 o'clock when the fever starts to go up. And so it happened again. I mean, 26 years later, go figure, it hasn't changed any. And so I knew I had malaria. I just knew. Wasn't tested for it or anything, but I knew. And then I got word that Max wanted me to come see him. And I'm like, it goes against everything that I always did for treating malaria. I always just went in and got a meal and then laid down. And I figured that if my red blood cells weren't carrying oxygen, I shouldn't use oxygen other than breathing and, so that it goes to the important things. And my muscles don't need to waste any of it. Well, I said, in my mind, I said, Lord, we got to do this because I'm leaving. I'm supposed to be leaving right away. I was supposed to leave Wednesday. And this was the day before when I came down with malaria. And so I said, yep, we'll go. And Peter and I just took right off and went up there. And while we were there, this happened. I don't know if I can bring that up at all. I think that's as close as it's going to get. I'm in the middle of that huddle. And I mean, I've never been inside of a huddle quite like that. And there was children with snot coming out of their nose being pushed up against me, and I'm right up against Max, and I'm trying to show them pictures on a computer, this one no less. And all of this mass of bodies around me, and I'm just saying to the Lord, Lord, is this what it was like when the crowd pressed on you? Just help me be like you and have nothing but feelings of love, and help me not to suffocate. I can't breathe in here. But I was telling Peter what was going through my mind and the prayers that were going through my mind later, and he says,
such a big change. So it's really humbling when God uses you in ways like this. You don't know, I may not know for another 26 years. These people will never forget that event. They'll never forget it. I won't remember much about it, but they will never forget it. That's the one thing I found when I came back to Tipas. I thought I had failed my mission there. I didn't think that anything had been accomplished. But everywhere I turned, God showed me where He had used me to teach somebody something. And all of the ones who, when they found this book, were convicted of the truth were ones that had worshiped with us while we were there. And that's the core group that started this wave. And so what God showed me was that it's not me. He's the one that's doing the work. And He doesn't fail. Even if you think you didn't do much, it's all in His plan, all in His timing, and everything just, it was so incredible. And everyone, it didn't matter whether they were the Christian Brethren Church or those that were completely out. I was visited by men who used to be elders in their church, who are now drinkers, married to more than one wife. And I said, so what you're telling me is that you are the watchdogs that can no longer bark. And they just kind of hung their heads. But they came to visit me. They're friends. We talked about, they gave me the openings to be able to share that kind of concept with them because they were the leaders of their church. And when the company came in and money started coming in, they fell away and followed after worldly things. There's so much work to be done among these individuals because they all look up to me and we're friends from before. And so there's no question that God has shown me that there's much that He can do through just my willingness to go. And I just simply need to be willing to go. As you can see, the malaria didn't make me feel real good. That very same evening, they came after I had gotten about 2 hours or 3 hours worth of rest on the veranda. The church members came and said, tonight is our Bung Kai Kai, our gathering with food, our potluck, and our going away ceremony for you. And it's been organized and everything's been done and everybody's gathered. And is there any way that, they knew I wasn't going to walk a mile because that's how far it was to the church from where I was staying. And they said, can we take you in the canoe and put a chair up for you to sit there? And would you be willing to come? And I said, absolutely, let's go. They would have been terribly disappointed if I hadn't come. But as you can tell, I wasn't feeling all that great. So here's all the group. This man was the council of the village, and he was one of the ones that was in the church and has backslidden. And he is representing the community, telling me that they are absolutely welcoming me to come back and that my job is to clean up all of the problems in the village, all the drunkenness and all the young people that are big-heading around, and that's my job. And he's more than happy to have me come back and do that. And I was thinking, and I'm going to start with you, Cosby, but I didn't say that. He's one of our boys. This video, I'm not worried about the sound on this because you can't hear him anyway. He's such a quiet speaker. But this is David. But what I want you to see is the emotion. Oops, I pushed the wrong button. We'll try that again. I want to see if I can't get it closer.
Thank you. Thank you, Daddy.
He can't talk. He's basically saying that never entered their wildest dreams that we would come back. But that it has fired him up with such hope for the village. And he's so excited about working with me. He's got all kinds of plans. He's telling me about interests in other villages that we're going to go visit. And
Thank you, Long.
You know, he's acting like I'm your pastor instead of just another elder. We're both elders. We're going to work together as elders. I'm not going to try to take over the role as pastor. He's done so much. I don't want to mess it up. But he's a simple, absolutely rock solid, lovely human being that is so helpful to everybody. And he doesn't care what religion you are or who you are. If you need something, he's there. And he just never quits. And like when he found out I wanted to go on that little hike up with Gaspar, he immediately was going to go with me. Even though he couldn't climb the mountain quite as, I think he was tired. Either that or he was just making me feel good. Because that's just the way he is. What a blessing. That's David. This is one that I hope we can figure out a way to make it so you can hear it. So guys up in the sound booth, pay attention. It's not very loud. Bendo is going to sing my thank you song. And if you listen really carefully, it's in Pidgin, but I think you'll catch the names. And I'll just kind of do a little voiceover occasionally. What he's done is he's composed a song that starts with David, which is where it should start. Elder David. And then 3 papas in the village who gave the ground. And also they were the ones who asked AFM to send a missionary. They asked John Kent to send a missionary. If you know the name John Kent, he was the original AFM missionary in the May River Project. Then he mentions John Kent. Then he mentions John Kent's mission, which would be AFM. Then he mentions the Sepik mission. And last and least, he mentions me. And it's just a beautiful welcome song. So I want you to hear it. Thank you song.
Me to neplom innocent people. Me got
He says he has 30 more years to
next
live,
time
and his
go
voice isn't
down
that good anymore. I forgot to ask him how he knows how long he's going to live. But he's getting right around 50, so he thinks he's going to make it to 80, I guess.
Thank you, true long elder David. Thank you, true long observation from you. Thank you, true long brave long you. God bless you. Thank you, true long triple papa.
Triple papa.
Thank you, true long cooperation. Thank you, true long request missionary. God bless you.
God by blessing you, Pala.
Thank you, true Lord John Kent.
John Kent.
Thank you, true Lord Mission Lord you. Thank you, true Lord supporting request. God by blessing you. Thank you, true Lord Civic Mission.
Sepik mission.
Thank you, true Lord Corporation. Thank you, true Lord. Approve request. God bless you, Pella.
You, Pella, is just you. God will bless you.
Thank you, true Lord Jack Jimbo. Thank you, true Lord Karim Gospel.
Thank you for carrying the gospel here.
Kirabim SDA Church. God bless you.
Kirabim SDA Church, building the SDA Church.
Thank you, true love. Kirabim SDA Church. God bless you.
Well, as you can imagine, I was in tears.
One time, Pastor, only you stop. President.
He's apologizing to Peter Ollie for not including his name. He said that was included when he said Sepik mission. So that was our going away. And a couple of days later, after a little more treatment of malaria, I hitched a ride with Akan up to the place where the road comes to the river, and we headed out. I was still on the tail end, so I had 3 days. The medicine was finished, and so I was basically well, but your body doesn't think so for a while yet. But we had smiles. It was sad to leave. This is where we first got to the Sepik River. This just gives you an idea of how much stuff they put in those canoes. everything that's on the ground there ended up in those 2 canoes. And they weren't very far out of the water when they headed downriver. That's how we travel. Akon's not dead, but he's enjoying his rest as we're waiting for a vehicle. We were there for nearly 5 hours, 6 hours. It was almost dark on Friday evening before we finally, a vehicle came out that we could get a ride into town. We did not have any arranged transportation because our arranged transportation was for Wednesday. And we didn't go on Wednesday. So we just waited it out. I prayed about it, and I said, Lord, if you want us to travel and get there before Sabbath, just arrange the vehicles because we have no way to do it. And so we waited and waited. It was almost sundown when a Catholic vehicle showed up. A vehicle driven by the Catholics, anyway. We got a ride back to town. So a little bit of the road travel at night. We ended up arriving at Vanimo at midnight and had to bang on the door for, Orion Lawrence was there at the time, and they came to open the door for us, and we all crowded into the pastor's house. Both pastors were there, and Orion and his wife, and Peter and I were sharing that little house in Vanimo. This is the new church in Vanimo. I'm pretty excited about it, but I wish that they would finish it and move into it because they're still in the little it's beautiful, but maybe a little overkill for their budget. They haven't finished it. This is the front of the church they're currently worshiping in. Peter and I just had more fun than a couple of old soldiers usually get to have. The highlight, I told you before I left that I knew I needed to connect with the union office over there, and I had a friend who was in the secretary's position. Do you remember that? And his name is Leonard Sumatow, and he was the president of the Northern Milne Bay mission when Peter and I did this projector work. Well, this is another indication of God's working. I knew I needed to communicate with him, but I didn't know how that was going to happen. And I knew it probably wouldn't happen until after we were back from our journey to Tipos. But before we went, for some reason, Leonard called Peter and said he needed to talk to him. And Peter said, well, I'm with Jack right now, and I'm going to be out of reach for several weeks. Jack's here? You guys, what are you guys doing? Man, he was all ears. He wanted to know what was going on. So he says, well, let me talk to him. So I chatted with him on the phone. I told him what we were doing, and I told him that we needed to talk to him because I was going to need their help if I was going to get a visa. And he said, absolutely. Well, look, get in touch with me when you get back out. So we changed our plans and decided that from Vanimo we would go to Leh, where the union headquarters are, and stay with Peter's daughter. And for that entire last week that I was going to be in the country, where I intended to go to Peter's village and sit on the beach and work on my pictures and all of the stories and everything. And instead, we're sitting in Leh. We got there on Sunday night. Monday, we were trying to contact Leonard, and it wasn't getting any response. Peter wasn't getting any response. So we walked over to the union office, and his secretary said, oh, he's supposed to show up any minute. He's been gone, and he just flew in, and he's coming back from the airport. And basically about then, we turned around, and he'd showed up. He still had his backpack, and he had just walked in. And Peter says, we've been trying to get in touch with you. He says, yeah, they stole my phone. And interestingly, so Peter said, well, we're trying to make an appointment. We were trying to make an appointment so we could share our experiences with you. And he goes, well, your appointment's now. Come into my office. And make a long story short, this ended up in an invitation to present our story to the executive committee of the union, which was meeting that following Thursday. All of the mission presidents from the entire country and the South Pacific Division president and other individuals who are part of this executive committee. So this is me in front of the executive committee. They're trying to figure out how to do my pictures through their Zoom, which didn't work very well, messed up my pictures, and we weren't able to connect my computer, so they were doing it off of a thumb drive and everything. So I had 10 minutes to tell the story. So I told Bendo's story of the piece of paper that came flying out of the ground and stuck on his leg, and I told him what our family wanted to do, that we wanted to go and live in Tipas, that we were selling everything in the States, and we wanted to go and spend the rest of our lives there. There was hardly a dry eye in that room before we were done. They saw God's hand, and they saw what was going on there, and Peter gave them a little talk as well. And the CPIC mission president was in the room too, and I hadn't really met him other than 3 years ago. At that time, he was the Secretary of the Union. And so it was just absolutely orchestrated by the Lord. Everything, the timing, the fact that we were there at that time, that had to go all the way back to when I bought the tickets to go. Everything was orchestrated to come up to that final, because at the end of this little session that they gave me, Leonard added on an addendum to the motion that was already on the board that they were just getting ready to vote on, to invite the Sample family to come as volunteer missionaries to work under the church, and to assist us with the visa process the same way they do for all of the missionaries that come in. The AFM missionaries, they already have a consultant that does all of this. And I saw the motion on the board, and I saw the unanimous vote, and then the overwhelming response that they gave us after we were through. It was a beautiful end to a beautiful trip that showed that God had it all in hand. And I know I'm missing all kinds of things. The pictures kept me on track for the most part. But that's exactly how I feel, right there. And I've had several contacts with Peter since I got back. And John Yalpa has called me a number of times. In fact, I got a call from John Yalpa this morning. John Yalpa is the father of the baby that was born to the student missionary who got pregnant while she was on our project. And John Yalpa, I gave him pictures of his daughter and his grandson. And he has been doing everything he can to make connection. And this morning he had to call me to tell me he finally heard her voice. They finally got together on WhatsApp during the night, last night, this morning. And he was pretty excited. John Yalpa is not attending church. He's not living a Christian life at all. But I believe that this friendship and this connection that has developed is going to make a difference in his life, and I'm praying for him. So if you have any questions, our 2 hours is up based on if we started on time. It is 5 o'clock. And yes, Chris.
I wanted to know how the Mark's Bible books got there.
So do I. I have absolutely zero memories. I'm praying that God will trigger some memory cell. I don't remember getting that box of Mark Bibles, and it's in Pidgin, no less. And I can't find anybody in the country that knows anything about that book or that can help me get some more, or it's completely, I don't know what I'm going to do but have to retranslate it because that book is so powerful. Yeah. Well, Peter remembers that the mission had these back when he was a president, but he doesn't, I don't remember buying them. I don't remember leaving them in the house. It's just a mystery, but a lovely one, huh? Mark, go for it.
What is the currency used back there?
Put that up.
What is the currency used back there?
Kina.
How do you spell that?
K-I-N-A.
We'll get you one that does.
How do you exchange American money?
You go to the bank at the airport. The currency exchange at the airport. It's the only place they let me do it.
Take American with you and then exchange it at the airport.
Well, that's one way. I can use my credit card, and that's automatic then.
Okay.
There's lots of ways. They're uptown. I mean, they're civilized in town.
Okay.
In the cities, they have big international banks and all the sorts of things. I just showed you a corner of the country that's just sort of untouched.
Right.
I mean, it's not untouched. It's been touched a lot since we left, but they still live exactly the same way. There's only 2 water tanks in the town and in the village, and they still wash in those filthy little streams that come out of the swamps and get in the lake, which is over 100-degree water. Yes. Anyone else?
Right here. Do you know how far it is from the Solomon Islands to Papua New Guinea?
If you go, if it's really, they're basically bordering. If you go from Bougainville, which is the autonomous region of Papua New Guinea, the last island in that direction, then there's the border in the sea somewhere, and then it's Solomon Islands. So we're neighboring countries. So I don't know how many miles it is. Not that many. I mean, a day's trip.
How do they mow that nice lawn?
They have a lawnmower.
Do they?
Yeah. Or they use their sari, their grass knives that are bent on the ends, and they can do a pretty good job.
Before I give it to Miss Connie, while we saw many of the pictures there, I'm sure some of us were guessing, how warm was it there?
Oh, about 88 degrees and 88% humidity or something like that. I didn't have a gauge, but that's kind of what it felt like.
I don't have a question, but I have a comment. It looks to me like God has arranged every step of the way.
Yes.
Every step of the way.
Thank you for saying that, because that's what I wanted. I wanted you to get that impression. I didn't do anything. I wandered through this like Alice in Wonderland, because all I could do was guess, and then I just put it in the Lord's hand. You know, I trusted that God was giving me wisdom because I asked Him to. So when I finally bought the ticket, I had nothing but just, I had read something in the Spirit of Prophecy. I kept asking the Lord, make sure this isn't sparks of my own kindling. Is this real? Do you really want me to go? When shall I go? Asking for wisdom every day and for the Holy Spirit. And I read something in the Spirit of Prophecy that says, you ask for wisdom. Isn't it time that you believe you've received it and move forward?
Until I close the door.
So that's when I bought the ticket, and it was the right timing.
God arranged that.
Certainly not my wisdom. Okay. One thing I want to mention is the project is bigger. God's project is bigger than what mine was. Because now I'm responsible for building more than one house and a clinic and a new church, because it's not going to be big enough. And so there's a lot of things that God is going to provide the needed funds for that are beyond our little house where we can sit down and enjoy printing books and translating and the kind of work I'm going to do. I look at all of these laborers there, these younger fellas, and all they need is encouragement and materials to put in their hands, and this work is just going to go like wildfire. I'm not going to be the one doing the work. I'm just going to be part of it. I'm going to be part of the group, and we're going to be encouraging each other and working together.
And don't forget that you have to clean up the village.
Yeah. Thanks, Cosby.
So
all
how
of the
long before you go? I think
As-
we all want to know.
Well, you know, God hasn't told me yet, but I am absolutely sure that I'm right perfectly on His timing. What's interesting is He's provided us with a house to house sit right up until about the end of February. So maybe that's when we're going to get to go.
How long does it take for the visas to process?
Well, they gave me sort of a framework. The consultant said, you know, it takes 1 to 2 weeks for this, barring any, in the land of the unexpected, those any things always show up. And then that's the work permit. And then, well, before that, Corey has to have her provisional nursing license, then her work permit. Then we have to apply for the visas. And then once all of that comes in and our doctor's appointments are done and our chest x-rays and our, you know, HIV tests and all the stuff we have to do, once that's all done and they get all of that, then they send everything to our PNG mission here in the States, where the ambassadors are, or whatever you call them. Then we have to send them our passports, and it has to get stamped in there, and then they send it back to us. Sounds like a pretty involved process. We're right now just trying to figure out what doctor we're going to go to get our, you know, because we don't own a doctor. People ask you, who's your doctor? I don't have one. So we got to figure out who we're going to go to, because we're not going to be a long-term customer for them. So we're just asking them to do a favor and do our makeup workups and
sign all the papers that tell the government over there that we're healthy. And then we have to get police reports and do our thumbprints and all the fun stuff.
Jack, if Pastor hasn't asked, will AFM make provision for a state line student missionary?
I have no idea what AFM will do. I'm not working with AFM.
Just our church, then?
That's right.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, AFM considers me too old to do a career missionary position. And they just wanted to send me to help build something in one of the other missions. And God had laid this mission on my heart so heavily that I sent John a letter and I said, we're going to pursue other options. And there's another sending organization in town here that offered to take it over too, but we already got the board approval from this church, and we love the fact that we're with our home church. So, yeah.
Do you need money?
God knows that. God knows how much we're going to need. I know that the needs will go beyond what we get from the sale of our properties. That will take care of our own house. We'll be set and living comfortably in Tipos on the money that God has already provided us. But we won't get much of a hospital built. I'm going to use the word hospital. Because my dream is a building that includes wards and specialized treatment rooms that are set up for various doctors that might fly in and do something like eye surgery, or they might do something like, there's a lot of different specialties, and the flying doctor program was working when we were there before, and we had a doctor fly in, and if we were able to equip rooms that were already set up, then that could be a real blessing to the people there. Yes?
What temperature is the water?
Well, the Sepik River itself is kind of chilly. It's probably around 70 something. The lake that we're on, because it doesn't have an outlet, the Sepik affects it. So the height of the Sepik it has an outlet on one end, but that used to be actually part of the Sepik River, and it's closed off on one end. So now there's no flow from the cold Sepik water going through. And so it can be, when we lived there, we were in a houseboat, and we measured the surface temperature. The water was 110 degrees. So it's only the very top, but it's real hot. And if you have to take your bath in that, when it's already almost 90 degrees and the humidity is right up at the top, you don't feel really like you got, I bathed in that once, and I bathed in this little creek coming through that looks like kind of brown, muddy water. I was dreaming of the day when my house was done, because when we lived there before, we had a shower from rainwater and clean water, and we'll have that again. But I've told my wife and daughter that they might have to go through just a little bit of time, similar to what we might have to go back to Vanimo just to get away from it for a while if we don't get things set up as fast as I would normally go ahead and have things kind of set up before I bring my ladies there, but they don't want me to do that this time. They want to come and rough it out with me, and I'm saying, well, okay, we'll have an escape plan. If it gets to be too much, we'll go back to town for a little while, but we'll see if they can handle it, because it's challenging. Yeah, I think I'm scaring her now. Well, as long as it's rainy season, we'll be fine, because when we go out, we'll have roofing metal that we can instantly set up to go into some kind of buckets, so we can collect water. But you use it up pretty fast if you live the American lifestyle. Okay? Next? No? Time to go eat? You have a question? No, he says time to go eat. Oh, time to go eat. So as far as your question, Connie, there's going to always be needs that are beyond what we already have of our own money. So yes, money will come flowing, but as God impresses people, we're not going to do what we called in the past fundraising. We're simply going to share what God is doing, and people who feel compelled, there is a channel that you can use. The church is the way that the funds would come through.
And, No, it's here, this church.
So.
For Asia as well?
I'm sorry, I'm not,
Well,
what's
you've
the
been to-
connection?
Have you contacted them to see if they would also be involved in your mission?
No, I haven't contacted other organizations.
So let me respond a little bit to Connie's question, though. You know, when my wife and I moved down to Shia Village, down in the Deep South, Catholic village, we were living down there. Joy was the healthcare worker, and they had a little Adventist group that was wanting to build a church. And so I told them up front, I said, I've got good news. I said, I believe that God wants us to build a church right here. I said, the bad news is that I don't have any money right now to build this church. But I said, the good news is that God does.
Amen.
And when we put our foot in the water, and we found this again and again and again, if it's God's will, it's God's bill.
That's it.
And we put our foot in the water, and the water parts, but it will never, ever part until you put your foot in the water. And so, and we saw that again and again. We built churches, we built schools, and, you know, and did a number of different projects and stuff like that. Supported Bible workers, but you always, it always feels like you never have quite the money that you need. But then, as you continue to move forward, you look back and you see what God has done. So
that's it. It's amazing when you don't try to figure out where the money's going to come from.
So it's best not to, you know, not to try to figure it all out. Just as God opens the door, go forward.
Right now, the door is open for us to go. Our house is sold. It closes in just a few weeks. And that money is enough for us to go over there, build a house, and still have some money left over. And the way we're doing this is we're buying a sawmill, and I'm buying woodworking equipment to create what I need in the building over there. And that's actually house cost, because the trees aren't going to cost me anything. The deal that I have with the villagers is I provide the sawmill and some fuel. They do the cutting of their own trees, and I get half of the lumber. And that's forever, as long as the equipment, as I keep the equipment in good shape, and they keep needing more and more, you know, they get to cut stuff for their own projects. They use my saw and my fuel. I get half the lumber, and it's just going to build up. We'll be building things here and there and everywhere as the mission grows, and the only expenses we have then are cement and roofing iron. I mean, there's minor other things. Obviously, we'll have some solar panels and this and that and the other thing. But it's amazing how inexpensive you can build when you're using local materials that aren't costing you anything. Leroy and then Mary.
Do you use any rosewood over there? Do they have the rosewood trees?
They do have rosewood.
Yeah,
yes.
A beautiful tree.
It is a beautiful tree, and it's also termite resistant like the Quila is, so I hope to be using a fair amount of it.
Is there an account set up here through the church that people can give to?
Yes, there is. It's not officially announced, but Bonnie is aware.
Okay. I hadn't checked with Bonnie after I got back. She hadn't done that before I left, so thank you for that, Pastor.
Let me just respond to that very quickly. So if you put in your tithe envelope, you put something in the tithe envelope, and you just put PNG project, Bonnie, that will be all that Bonnie needs to know. You know.
Is it online? Which project, PNG?
Like the PNG, do not put sample. You cannot put a name but this is a voted project, voted and approved by the church board. But because of IRS purposes, you cannot put names on there because that gets muddy real quick. So just put PNG project on your tithe envelope under the local section, and that should be sufficient.
So
I don't know about that. That might not.
Something can be done.
Yeah, you'd have to check.
So
the question was, is it on the online giving app? And I should ask the one who probably is in charge of that over there, but maybe that's for another time. But I don't know. But definitely, if you put it on the envelope here, it'll work.
Since I talked to you last, we've waffled back and forth regarding whether we're going to ship a container. We've decided we are going to ship one now. And I'm getting all of my woodworking equipment here and testing it and doing, I've already got how I'm going to do my floorboards. I'm, doing, getting the right router table set up and all of this stuff. So we are going to do a shipping container. So things like Bibles and glasses and all that stuff will get shipped with our initial shipment. So if you give Bibles, I did find out that the people out there, they really want the pigeon Bibles, and unfortunately there's a lack of those even in the country. I can't get any right now they're behind on printing those. That was a problem 3 years ago too. I couldn't get any at all. So I'm not sure what's going on there. But I can do it online. So if I want to do Bible studies with them, I can print out the section we're studying together anytime I want. It's just too big of a print job to do the whole Bible for that. So go ahead, Mary.
You were talking about stepping in, putting your foot in the water. Put your foot in the water, and I remember the heralds singing, go in a little deeper. Go in a little.
The problem, Mary, is your hand down on the bottom of the mic is blocking the antenna, and then it can't send the message.
Anyway, you were saying about a little deeper, put
Yeah.
your foot in, and I was remembering Harold singing, put your foot in a little deeper, walk in just a little deeper. I loved that song.
Amen. Next Sabbath, I'll be in Emmett, Idaho. They've also asked to support our mission. That's where Lloyd and Janet have gone, and they got. So we're going to share our story there. I don't know anybody but Lloyd and Janet. Well, maybe I'll find out that I know somebody when we get over there. But we're just not doing this the old-fashioned way. We're not going around raising funds. God has already provided what we need to get over there. There are funds even over there. Even the division is interested in what we're doing because we're going into the area close to the border and they're targeting border evangelism. So there may be funds for some volunteer missionaries in these areas that we bring up. So there's all kinds of things that God can do here. I'm not going to try to put any kind of when I pray, I don't even give him specifics. I just simply say, this is what I think you're asking us to do, Lord, but we'll watch and see how you're going to do it. And we're here to help in any way you ask us to. And that's basically the attitude that we have. There's not going to be any shortage of things that we can do over there.
About those Bibles, here's one for the stepping into the water. God knows what those people need. We just need to get down on our knees and pray.
Amen. Thank you. Yep. No question. I would love to have him come over and meet you guys. That's a dream, but not likely to happen. Too expensive. You're going to get to meet him in heaven, I'm sure of that. One interesting story, when he was a young missionary, he was in a village where there was this horrendous spiritual thing going on. When somebody would die, they would come back and torment their relatives. That's what they were thinking, that's what it was. They didn't realize it was Satan's angels doing it. And when Peter was just a young missionary, he was new at this, and he had never seen this before, dishes rattling in the kitchen. He said, man, turn the light on for whoever's in there. And they said, oh, that's the lady who died yesterday. She's coming back to register her complaints to this person that she, And so he went back to his house. In fact, he went into the church, and he said, Lord, this needs to end here. These people are new believers, and this just needs to end. And he prayed for quite a while about it. And then it was a short time after that he left there. He came back to that place with me 3 years ago for the first time in almost 40 years since he had been there. It was 40 years. And they told him from that time that ended in that village because of his prayers. Real man of God.
I just wanted to make a comment that the fact that he's not fundraising is going to save a whole lot of time.
Oh, yeah.
Because he's able to go now and begin work soon rather than waiting 2 or 3 years until he's fundraised for all of this needs, even though he doesn't even know fully what he's going to need. Until you really get into a project and see what God has in mind, you don't really know what you need completely.
Absolutely. And if you've ever experienced sending a container, by the time it gets there, there's a bunch of stuff in there that you don't know why you sent it over there. Just kind of works that way, but.
Yeah, we had people sending containers with firewood to Guyana.
Oh, nice.
And bottled water. I'm like,
really?
The land of many waters, and they're sending bottled water, please.
Bottled water and firewood. That would be very intriguing. I've never experienced that.
Yeah.
Helen.
You mentioned an airstrip earlier. Is there a working airstrip at this point?
There is no airstrip in Tipos. We made one, but it's no longer. It just went back to jungle, and they built the school on one end of it. Oh, here's some really interesting news. The road is already all the way to Edwaki, which is the government station for Namia. I've heard this, but haven't been able to go and verify it. There's only one bridge left, and we will be able to drive to Tipos from town, from Banimo. No more river part. And that's just supposed to happen this year, this new year. And then we will be able to park our vehicle right at our doorstep. And that will be about an 8-hour drive to town on those beautiful highways that you saw. It'd be a piece of cake compared to going 240 miles down the river and then 6 hours on one of those beautiful roads, only not so beautiful. In some other public transportation where you're jammed in with a million other people and all their stuff. We'll have our own vehicle, and that's included in our budget. We're going to have a vehicle that goes back and forth. It's just going to make things so much easier. I never dreamed that would be that they'd be at that stage. And then very shortly, there's another section that will connect us to Wewak by road as well. So we'll be connected to both the major towns in Sepik. That'll probably be more like a 10 or 12-hour drive to go there. But it's just stunning. I was frustrated with all of the logs going out of the country for China. And I was sitting there one day as I was there just thinking about this. And the Lord said to me, "Why are you worried about trees that are going to burn in just a really short time? Look at the roads that I've made for you to carry the gospel to all these places that were impossible to get to before." I said, "Thank you, Lord. I like that." I told that at the executive committee meeting. And I just saw their thought process on that. Wow, that's true. Because now we can drive, we'll be able to drive to these places like Tipos, all of these areas. They're even going to put a bridge across the Sepik River right there where we are, that giant Sepik River. Why? Because they've got gold and oil on the other side that they're going to be making pipelines that go out to the coast. So we're going to be on major highways. I mean, those are major highways. I'm talking about gravel roads, but still, that means it's going to be maintained. That's all it means. It's going to be maintained. If a bridge breaks, they fix it. If there's a big pothole, they'll fill it eventually because these big trucks are going and coming. Because somebody's making money because of that road, the road's going to be maintained. We need to capitalize on this and get it done now because it's going to burn shortly. And these people are just so ready. They're so hungry.
You need an amphibious airplane. Land it right there.
Well, that's true, but Edwaki is only like, once that bridge is in, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, that's not a bad drive to the airport. And you know what's cool is San Fran, that's the Good Samaritan air, they land on the water right there at Tipos and come right up. The place they can come to shore is right where the clinic's going to be. And we'll be connected to the road right down past the clinic, right to the water. All the other villages can bring those that need medevac. They'll come and land right on our water with their float planes, and so we have an airstrip.
Cool. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
There. Yeah.
I didn't catch that. You were saying on the water?
No, I was saying, yeah, the river is a wonderful airstrip for an
I missed
amphib.
that. No, they already use it. Yeah, they call those guys. In fact, they have an agent that is in communication with them whenever they need them to come. And that's Bendo, no less. Bendo's the one who's trained to give the medicine. He's the one that took my blood test and showed me that I had falciparum malaria and then gave me the meds. Wow. He's not a nurse or anything, but he's had a little bit of training, and he's the only one in the village that does it because They know their clinic is no longer there. We're going to bring it up again.
Good.
So
Wonderful.
pray for us. It's just, we're just going to enjoy just stepping our feet in the water and just letting God be who He is. It's different. I mean, I've always known and understood that, but I'm experiencing it in a deeper way now than I ever have before. And I saw more evidence of God's hand in that 6-week time period than many, many other years. So.
Well, God is at work, and we're. Did you have a quick question?
Thank you. Yes, the closer we get to the very, very end, which is soon, I believe, the more wonderful miracles we're seeing. And I think that all of this is just, every detail seems to be arranged by the Lord God Almighty. It just looks like it. You've been describing step after step after step that seems almost impossible, but look what God's doing. Look how close it is. Look, one thing after another is being provided.
I was so frightened about the visa process, but now I have this lovely lady who's emailing me and saying, oh, don't worry, Jack, we've got this. All you have to do is put your thumbprint on that and sign it and send it back to us, and we'll fill it in for you.
Isn't that great?
And I'm like, thank you, because these papers are just so confusing. And she says, don't worry, we'll get this done.
It's great. God's in charge.
Well, I had said to the Lord, I said, Lord, I am so confused by this, and I just don't even know where to start. You're going to have to take care of this, because I honestly don't know how to do this. It's just crazy. Yeah.
I just wanted to say one thing, and that is that I am nowhere behind this guy in my desire to go. And it's not like he's dragging me out there. No. I fully support and am with you 100%.
Let's do it.
Well,
That's what I'm talking about.
Michael. And then after Michael, we're going to have a word of prayer, okay?
I really enjoyed seeing your presentation today, Jack. That last little comment at the end about not worrying too much, though, about the wood, all the wood that's being chopped down and sent to China, and then the oil discovery and the mining there. I just, I don't really know. I guess maybe I have a kind of an environmental bend to myself. So
me too.
But I just, if you look what happens in Indonesia, because Indonesia is having a lot of its resources mined into China, it's heartbreaking. You should see the forests there. It's just they've been raised for palm oil, for example, and also it's people are trying to develop that because palm oil is a fairly lucrative commodity, and they're burning peat moss that traps an enormous amount of CO2. I mean, just an enormous amount of CO2. It's being released because it's really haphazard. There's nobody incentivized at all to make sure it's done properly, and I don't really think there's anybody in PNG, aside from insiders, that are going to benefit from that oil and mining. Meanwhile, the people that work there, it's going to be Sin City. It tends to create all sorts of corruption.
The point, Michael, the point is, though, that I can't stop that. And what God told me is to keep my focus, not to get caught up in it, because what happens when we get caught up in it in a foreign land, we get on the wrong side of where the big money is, then we're no longer able to do the work God sent us there to do. I wasn't trying to give an impression that I'm not interested in the environment. I see what palm oil has done there in the Bewani area, and I cry for those people. I see these challenges you're talking about, and that's why I was so distraught. But God whispered in my ear that He says, wait a minute, focus on what I've given you for your task, and that's the roads, because these roads would not have existed without these companies. And granted, I don't want to speed up the process of the destruction of this earth. But we do know, and what God impressed me was, we do have only a short time left on this earth, and we do know that this is all going to burn. It's going to be done. It's gone. And so for me to get distracted and get involved, I wouldn't even get to go to the country because they'd soon, be tired of me. But when I'm helping the people in what they're daily lives are, and just dealing with the everyday things and bringing them to Christ, if I stay focused on that and take advantage of the delightful roads that go everywhere now that were not there when we were there before. That was my only point. I'm sorry if I came across as being insensitive to the environment, because I'm not.
That's not the impression. I do hear, though, because I hear people say that Jesus is coming soon, so we don't really need to worry about some of these really pressing problems that we have. And I did hear a remark by the head of ADRA who encounters that same sort of sentiment. And what he said in response is that, none of the hospitals that Adventists have built around the world would have been built if people presumed that Jesus was going to come, say, in the next decade.
Right. No.
So we can, on the one hand, always be prepared, like the 10 virgins, the 5 wise virgins, always keeping the Holy Spirit in their lives, being Spirit-filled. But that doesn't mean that, because 10 years is really nothing in God's time scales.
That's right.
And we all know that.
Neither is 26.
Right.
Isn't that incredible?
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank everyone for coming out, and thank you so much. And thank you, Jack, for answering God's call, and for being willing, and Alana, and Corey.
And Corey.
And it's exciting to see how God is going to work. And we're going to have a special time of prayer. And just thinking of who else, maybe Dad. I need to get another missionary up here. Who else has been a missionary? Or gone as a student missionary? Anyways, we want to have a time of special prayer. Julie? Or James? Anyways, let's just have a prayer. We can have a prayer right here, and let's just ask for a special guidance as the Lord leads.
Can we kneel?
Sure, let's do that. Father in heaven, Lord, we see the fingerprints of your almighty hand. We recognize how you have led, and Lord, again, having worked overseas and seen again and again how you have opened doors and closed doors, Lord, it's clear to see that you are moving us forward as fast as we are willing to step into the water. And Lord, you are going to part the way, and you're going to show. You said in Psalms 32, verse 8, I will instruct you and teach you in the way that you should go. I will guide you with mine eye. Well, you've been doing that for a long time. And Lord, you've placed upon the heart of the samples, Jack, Ilana, and Corey, to be able to go over to PNG and to give their lives in mission service. And so, Father, we want to support them and strengthen them, and ask that you would work mightily, especially that you would expedite everything so that they can get over there as quickly and efficiently as possible. Now, Father, we just pray, Lord, that you would just show the path forward, and we just give you all the glory and all the praise. We pray this in Jesus' name.
Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you.
All right. Okay. Thank you for coming. We are going to have a slight break right now. It's 5:35, around 6 o'clock.